Thank you very much. There's been a lot of discussion today about testing. We wanted to talk about really continuous testing and how that fits into a continuous model. And really some of the changes that are behind that, why that's important. It really is a focus of a lot of the changes that have happened in the market today, right? We really think about go back to 1990s where I was working well. We're really looking at client-server technology, right? And most of the apps we're building for employee partners, very few of those consumer. And we've seen the movement from client-server to Web 1.0, really to Web 2.0 that really brought to light all of the issues about consumerism, e-commerce, and making the web part. And therefore, the requirements of quality become much more important because that's where those consumers are going. The consumers are really heading on those websites, and whether it's on the web or the emergence of mobile commerce, that level of quality and the level of responsiveness on a particular site actually drives revenue. And so quality and being able to quickly maintain that space of development at the same speed of quality is really key. The other thing that's changed, right, is that when we were developing those client-server apps, we were developing those for 100 people. We were developing them for 500 partners. Now we're seeing unprecedented scale. We are now developing web apps in the case of a couple of our customers, the London Olympics or the Sochi Olympics, or even if you look at the World Cup, you're looking at millions of people and hundreds of thousands of people from different countries all going on and online and buying tickets and buying other, or looking at results and needing to be able to see that those results happen very quickly and making sure those transactions get processed in a very quick way. And so the quality of those applications, again, becomes key for those individuals, or those individuals go somewhere else. And you'll see we've actually done a number of different surveys and studies that show that, what is the actual patience of an individual consumer. And when it comes to North America, the patience is about 3 seconds. So if a page doesn't load in about that time, that's when they start bouncing. We also look at complexity, right? And so before, where we had monolithic applications, that was easy. We just build an application and off we go. Now with all these composite applications and where we're doing calls, right? So you're building a commerce site, you're doing a call to an inventory system, you're doing a call to a payment system, you're doing a call to even some different other types of databases to understand who the user actually is. All of those things need to be able to work when they come together. And if they don't work, then again, those consumers leave and they go somewhere else. And then so the real key here is how does quality keep up with the speed of delivery for development? Because that's one of the keys, right? In traditional systems, people have said, hey, we're going to develop and we're going to deliver. And there has been no testing in between in many cases. And so people have gotten traditionally very burned on that, but they've also ran out of time, and we'll see some examples of that. So if we look at continuous integration, there's a number of things we really like about it, right? First of all, from a development standpoint, we have small batch sizes. So that now allows us at the individual developer level to start building individual components of code and then check that code in, and then also be able to do more testing associated with that code. So if you're starting to do regression testing, or you're starting to build small performance testing through through something like Jenkins, you have that ability to be able to every night do a regression test, or every night do a small performance test, and now you can run hundreds, if not thousands, of tests overnight through these kind of CI systems and start at that small batch level from a development standpoint. You also have comprehension version control, so it allows you to be able to understand what versions you have and what's actually changed within those systems. And the key here, and the key for quality, is really about automation. And so when we look at automation, it's really about automating what matters. And so testers have traditionally been a little reluctant to automate things because they They find sometimes that some of those components actually break, or they're breaking scripts. And so it really is key to look at where are you trying to automate earlier in the process, and drive quality earlier in the process to be able to do that. And continuing integration, and we have a plug-in to Jenkins, really helps us do that, because traditionally what was happening is the testing is happening once you're feature complete. And that's where you run into all the problems. And what you want it to happen is you want to happen on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, so that you're doing, you're testing, you're fixing, you're testing, you're fixing, all the way through that, that process. And that's when you get that continuous feedback loop. And that continuous feedback loop goes not only to the development organization, but it goes to the testing organization, and it gives and to the operations organization, so that everyone in those organizations has the same view of what's happening. So what broke, what didn't work, what was the bug, and be able to have that continuity in being able to bring those teams together to be able to understand it. And it emphasizes now on making sure that, that you're delivering working builds into the system, so that those builds actually can perform as expected. And it gives you a consistent environment. And so CI, for us, gives us the opportunity to really drive this developer, tester, and operations collaboration together. And that's really the key to getting to this continuous delivery component. So one of the things we asked, and we did a webinar recently with our friends at CloudBees about continuous integration, and we really wanted to see where people were with it. And similar to the other survey that was done, we found very similar results. We found about 50% of the world today is actually applying continuous integration to their applications, and many people are looking at that. And so what that means is we're down that path of automation, we're down that path of improving performance. So one of the key points here, and one of the things that is kind of the thing that nobody talks about, is that although this application development has continued to evolve, in many cases testing has not. And really the areas that it has not evolved is really around speed, where, you know, a lot of, when we go back and we look at, delivering something from a feature complete standpoint, that's the first time the QA organization sees something, then it takes them just as long to be able to test it as it did to develop it. And so when we go back and look at agile systems, right, people were, and even in my case in a previous company, we were implementing agile. We did a great job from the development organization. We had scrum meetings, had 6-week sprints, and we'd get to the sprint, and then we hand it off to QA. And QA was never part of the process. And then QA would have their own 6-week sprint, and then we'd continue that process. And that doesn't work anymore in the world of millions and millions of mobile applications. The other piece is being able to make sure you can scale. And how do you get that scalability? I mean, if you're going to make sure that you can test for 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 users at any one particular time, where are you going to get that capacity? I built a product 15 years ago, and we actually had to go to Sun and take up all of their servers that they had to be able to test the performance capabilities of that capability. Today, you can have access to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of servers through cloud computing, which then drives affordability for being able to do high-level performance testing. So testing has always seemed to be the bottleneck, right? People don't like to do testing. It's been the bottleneck. It's been the problem. So why is that important, and why does it matter? Because a lot of times people have been able to say, hey, we've been able for many years to get away without testing the applications. Well, there is a particular case that didn't work out so well. And if you remember, this is Kathleen Sebelius. She's in front of the congressional committee explaining why healthcare.gov didn't work. And one of the reasons healthcare.gov didn't work is it was highly complex. They didn't actually test anything until the very, very end. And based on some of the information that we have, they really didn't start doing any kind of end-to-end testing until about 5 or 6 days before they launched. And when they got to that point, they were able to get 5 or 6 users online at the same time, but they just thought, let's hope and pray and send that out. right? And so after that, because they had government contractors and people from all different areas building technology in silos, they actually, only until they got it out and it didn't work, did they really start to pull back and start to use more systems that move that performance testing earlier into the cycle, take things in small chunks, take things in bite-sized pieces, and start to work on those different parts of the technology that really mattered. And so I would say before October, the idea of quality and quality importance wasn't that great. And now when I talk to my mom, she says, "Oh, now I understand what you do, because you help people like healthcare.gov get better." And we do, and we've done that for many different companies. So let's talk about what's been missing and why. How do we get to this area of continuous delivery with testing? And one of them is really key, has really been about automation and continuing to drive automation through different sets of organizations. And not only automation, it's not just the tools, but it's also the people and the processes. And so, as some of the speakers have talked about earlier, it's ensuring that the people, the processes are in place, and either through a bottom-up effort or a top-down effort, there is buy-in to changing those processes so that you begin to automate what you can and do that in a way that the organization accepts. The other key is because mobile, as our friend at Forrester said, is so different, it's driving change at a much faster rate. And so it's having an effect on the web application development as well. The other is the ability in the mobile world to test on real devices. And so being able to have access to real devices allows the capability of doing mobile test automation on those real devices, being able to quickly load apps onto those devices, being able to pull apps off, wipe them clean, do those types of activities has really been one of the critical components of being able to do testing on mobile devices. The third piece is performance testing, and making performance testing part of this integrated process. And being able to do small-scale performance testing, medium-scale performance testing, and large-scale performance testing so that you can understand throughout your development and deployment cycle what you're testing and find problems earlier in that cycle. So there's some things you can discover in a staging environment, there's some things you can discover in a pre-production environment, and then there's some things you really have to be in production to be able to catch in many cases. And then really integrating all of those pieces together. So the way that we look at it is really about building a factory, right? And if you look at what was done, 100 years ago from an automobile standpoint, it was really how did they build a high-quality factory to deliver, hundreds of cars off the assembly line. Well, first of all, they made sure they had the right materials. They built that assembly line, and they had an organizational structure and a set of processes to do that. And then they made sure, does it work as it's designed? Does it functionally do what it's supposed to do? And then the other part is, does it perform under different conditions? Does it perform under conditions that we didn't think about? Does it perform on a standard road, but what happens if it hits a curb? What happens if we try to put it on a dirt road? Where does it go? And so actually going out and then road testing the cars and then putting those in front of real drivers. Well, the same thing is true in the quality area, right? And so from a development standpoint, we've talked about doing unit testing and testing code at the unit level. But really we can bring that quality component much closer to the development organization by making sure that from a development standpoint, we're doing that continuous quality, right? So we're doing our unit testing, we're checking in our build, we're then running functional validation. And we can run multiple functional validations against our code, and we can make sure that all of those buttons work. The checkout button works, the inventory system works, and being able to do that through a nightly test. And then the other piece is looking at performance and scalability in that overall development process, so that being able to actually spin up 5 users or 10 users, so that being able to take just a little bit of load on a particular set of code and making sure that it's actually working as expected. And you'd be surprised at how many times that, hey, it can go through that functional validation, but when you try to do that 5 or 6 times with 5 or 6 virtual users, it starts to really have some issues. And that's where early on you can start to catch some of your performance problems. And then lastly, what actually happens with real users when you're simulating real users on real devices, and really being able to give that development organization, if they're building mobile applications, access to those capabilities. And so one of the keys that we look at is really how do you get to mobile test automation, and what is really required. And there really haven't been that many great solutions on the market until recently. And some of the choices before was either running simulations, right? So you would simulate with a mouse and a PC and a phone to simulate that application. But like if you wanted to simulate a shake, what did you do? Shake your mouse and the computer and see if those actually worked. So you really needed a set of capabilities that allowed you to be inside of the code. And so that you could start to measure that on an object level standpoint. And so, we've really moved from doing simulation to doing OCR, to being able to try to take pictures of our devices, to really be in the object and be on the object level, so that you can start to build test cases that are true to that code. And so that those test cases are now portable across, at least a set of iOS devices. And so if you think about it, if you have different size screens with an iPhone 5 or an iPad mini, you need to be able to make sure that when you're running those tests, you get the right set of validations. And so the only way to do that is really at the object code level. And so you can, in some cases, if it's the same app, you can even run that over both iOS and Android devices. Also, mobile test automation gives you the ability to also take some of those scripts and run performance measurement against it, so that you have an idea of how well those apps are performing. And then finally, really looking at getting real-time feedback. So if you start to think about building this loop, right, where you're developing products, you're testing products, and you're deploying products, what do you need to really see at each stage of that environment? Well, in the test scenario, you want to be able to get quick feedback, understand what's happening. But once you release that, you want that same set of information to come back through the operation systems and the development systems to be able to understand how are people using my applications, and what are they actually doing with those applications. And so being able to get real-time feedback is a key component of that. The other piece is really being able to have device clouds. And so traditionally over the last couple of years, what people have tried to do is hey, give me a couple of different devices and manually manage those device clouds or those devices. And now what we're seeing, and we work with a number of third parties, just like you see in the world of cloud computing, where you have a number of different servers that you can have access to, that same thing is now becoming true in the mobile world. And so now you can have access to private device clouds, and you can have private device clouds that give you, that are fully managed, that can sit behind the firewall, that you can manage those devices, you can add applications to them, you can reboot those apps, those devices, and do that remotely, and have complete control of them, and also have them managed securely. So that if you're building, enterprise applications, or if you're in the financial sector and you're building those types of applications, you don't want to actually access devices that might be in a public cloud. And then on the other side, sometimes if you have consumer-based applications, you want to be able to access public device clouds. And so being able to have the ability to go after and have dedicated devices that you might have for, a week or a month, for example, and be able to go access those, load your applications on those, and then be able to run run functional tests against those and get real-time information back. Allows you to get that kind of capability. And by being inside and by using object-based, by being as part of the app itself, you don't actually need to jailbreak these devices. And so, technically jailbreaking all these devices is illegal, and therefore most enterprises don't want to do that. So you really want to be able to have access to these devices without having to jailbreak them. The other piece is really starting to look at performance testing. And so if you think about performance testing, there's a whole bunch of different things that you can see at different stages of performance testing. And so one of the things that is great to be able to catch in the lab, right, are things like memory leaks and database thread counts and things like that, where you can start doing those low-level tests where you're accessing different components via different sets of APIs, and from a development standpoint, a CI standpoint, be able to kick off those tests. And then on the second level, there's really, in a staging environment where you actually are spinning up different application servers and different databases and a set of APIs that you're accessing, being able to do larger scale testing. And then at the end of the day, we are big proponents of doing production testing. And I know that there's a lot of people who say, we would never ever do production testing in our systems, but production testing is actually the only way of telling exactly how do you get a full replica of what's going to happen in that user environment. And usually what we're doing is we're trying to test that system at 150 to 200% of actually what our customers or clients think the load is going to be. And the way to be able to do that, and the reason we have that capability is one of the key technologies is really about real-time analytics. And so during any of these tests, while you're running a test, is the ability to be able to see exactly what the performance impact is on that particular application. And the reason that's important is it actually allows you to make changes to those applications while you're doing that test, right? And so literally, in a production environment, you can make configuration changes to the web application server. You can update changes to a load balancer in real time and see what that effect is, because in many cases it's not necessarily the code, it could be some other component. It could be an API call, for example, that can't handle the load. And so being able to test on all these different capabilities is really important, in being able to have that capability of delivering in a continuous delivery standpoint. And so also being able to scale, right? When we talk about these applications where before we were talking 1,000 users and now we're talking hundreds of thousands of users, how do you scale that capability? Well, it's really about being able to leverage cloud computing and leverage these resources that are now inexpensively available across the world. Amazon, Rackspace, all of these different companies now have servers that allow you to have access to them that you can take and generate load. So now you can easily spin up a set of performance tests and build a set of scripts very, very quickly. And so as you're developing that code and deploying that code, now you can actually go and say, okay, now we can test it in a real life environment. Now we can get a view of how we're performing. Now we can see that from a real-time analytics standpoint. We can test all the components associated with that, whether it's the CDN, third-party services, credit card, payment systems, et cetera. So it gives that full capability to be able to do that and leverage these third-party systems. And a lot of times you want to test from, where do you think people are coming from, right? And are they coming from a particular geography? Well, you need to be able to test against that geography, because what is happening in the network that's going to affect the performance on your particular application. So if we think about it, if we go back to kind of how do we start to deliver this continuous quality, it really is more than just doing unit testing, right? It's hey, I'm a developer, I've made a change to my code. So you check in your code as usual, right? And now you have that ability to spin up whatever a suitable environment is for you from that development standpoint. What is that consistent environment that you might have in the cloud, right? You know, all of this capability can actually be in the cloud, right? Between running, you know, your functional testing or your performance testing or your CI integration system. And then after you've run that functional test, you now can run iterative load tests, right? And you can begin to build benchmarks of of that application code, what that particular performance characteristic was of that code. And if you're building a mobile application, now you can access real mobile devices in either behind the firewall in your private cloud or externally in a public cloud. And then you can take all that data and you actually can embed that in Jenkins, or you can see that in another monitoring tool. And then finally, you can start to manage to performance benchmarks and baselines. So every time you're running these different sets of tests, now from a performance standpoint, you can also say, okay, hey, this was the baseline of what we did yesterday or last week or last month. How are we actually performing with that same set of tests? And so you can see how efficient your code has actually become. And then also, once you've gone through that whole deployment process, you can begin to see and collect real user data. And so this is the other kind of key component of what's happening in the changes that are available today as we look at the ability to process big sets of data, is the process of being able to really look at real user information. And so be able to start to tie real user information to performance characteristics. And this is why we can tell you today in a particular country, by browser, by application type, how patient a particular user might be. Because you can see all of the users from your particular application that are hitting either your web app or your mobile app, and what's happening from a performance standpoint around user engagement. And now you can have a conversation across both the business users, the operations people, the testers, and the developers about what should we be testing, because this is actually how people are accessing our information. What is the true performance characteristics of what we've built and what we've delivered, and how is that affecting user engagement? So you can go back to your business leaders and talk to them about, wow, if you look at what's happening on our commerce site, our conversions after 3 or 4 seconds are dropping dramatically. And you can have that business conversation about why you need more resources from a development standpoint or an infrastructure standpoint, because now you have real user data, and it's not simulated data. So really what we're looking to do is change this capability and go from a linear system to a constant continuous testing approach, right? Where it's no longer development on one side, testing in the middle, and operations, but it truly is a circle where we've got dev, ops, and test, and we're doing those things in an iterative process, and we're doing those things in a continuous process throughout the life cycle. And we're incorporating real information about how people are actually using our applications so that we can incorporate that into the testing cycle and to the business cycle about how well are we actually performing. So I wanted to give just 1 or 2 quick examples of customers who are actually doing this. One of our longtime customers is a company called FIS Mobile. And FIS Mobile, you may or may not be familiar with them, but they are the biggest mobile payment company in the world. They build a payment platform for a number of different companies and banks. And they actually were the platform that built the first Starbucks mobile app for being able to charge coffee. And so they were first worried about performance, but what happened is as they continued to add customers in the building of their mobile application, their QA organization was exploding. and it couldn't keep up with the development organization, and they couldn't onboard customers fast enough because their development organization could develop quickly enough, but they were doing everything on a manual basis. And so some of the results, they implemented a product that we have called Touch Test, which is a mobile test automation tool. And really what they were able to do is move from the capability of doing manual testing, and they moved from being able to take 250 hours of manual tests and run those in just 1 hour every evening. And they also were able to change the way that they did regression testing. And so one of the problems with the organization was, because QA was such a bottleneck and because they were doing everything in a manual way, a lot of the regression testing they didn't run until they were completely feature complete. And so they could do a development process over many, many weeks, and then they would go and run a manual regression test. And now they do those regression tests every night. And so what that has really led them to do is to be able to fix bugs much, much earlier, have a 25% reduction in time to market. So they're able to deliver speed, they're able to meet their customer requirements. And the other key is really reducing field failures. And with banking applications, it's really, if there's anything that consumers care about, it's their money. We have another customer, similar story, was doing manual testing. Their test cycles went from 3 weeks to really 2 to 3 days. And so by doing some set of automation and using FIS Mobile was also using Jenkins as their CI capability, they were able to actually improve that overall performance. So just some things to think about. One of it is understand your requirements when you're looking at doing continuous testing. And really, I always say automate what matters, right? Find the things that are most critical to your organization and that you can get people and process around and automate those. The other piece is, how do you leverage the cloud? So we've seen the ability of being able to leverage the cloud from a performance testing standpoint. You can also do it through a functional testing standpoint as well. Automate the most obvious and the most critical. Connect to a continuous process, and that's why we have a plug-in to Jenkins, because it gives us that ability to do that continuous process and think of it as a continuous iterative process. And then the last thing is really, you have to align your teams, right? And to align your teams, it helps to have the same set of information that goes across all of those different teams. And so with that, everybody has the same perspective. And one of the challenges a lot of times in different organizations is everybody has a piece of information, but they don't have similar information so they can make the same set of decisions. So with that, I take some questions, or do we have, is there any, okay, any questions? I think I answered them all at the testing table. Oh, yeah. So basically, they automated all of their testing, and so they put all those they had, I'm not sure how many thousands of tests. They put all those, instead they moved from going from a manual test environment to putting all those tests in a CI system and kicking off the testing, both the functional testing, and they now do small scale performance testing through Jenkins. And so it was UI, in that case it was their UI app regression testing that we're doing for their applications. And they have a number of different applications, so they essentially build mobile applications for different banking customers, and so they have a number of different, the apps are similar, but some of them are more specific, and so they can take, the other advantage they have is they can take some of those tests, those test suites and apply those to multiple applications, and then they build specific test cases for each of the specific applications as well. All right, thank you.